want to go ahead and introduce Peter Simon and Jenny Malika, and I have a few words to say about them before they proceed. So Peter Simon has developed, administered, and provided support to workforce development and basic skills programs in California for more than 35 years. In the role of consultant, community college dean, project director, and instructor, his work has been consistently focused on providing educational and career-related opportunities for people who have traditionally been excluded from pathways to advancement. His particular expertise is in the area of developing and supporting complex, multi-organizational partnerships such as community college, K-12 districts, employers, labor unions, community organizations, and government agencies that provide integrated basic skills and job training, leading to living wage employment and career progression. And previously, in an earlier life, he was an apprentice and journey level carpenter with the Carpenters Union in Seattle and Oakland for a number of years. So that's Peter. Peter, do you want to say anything before I introduce Jenny Malika? No? Okay. And then Jenny Malika has over 20 years of practitioner and leadership experience in the fields of workforce development, adult education, and community development. She has particular expertise in the collaborative design and sustainability of career education programs that are equitably accessible to worker learners with barriers such as limited English or basic skills. Since February 2012, her consulting service has provided a program and partnership development, fund development, strategic planning, qualitative research, writing, and evaluation for public and nonprofit agencies. So you can see why I was very excited to ask these two individuals to take the lead and to provide the specific 30 minutes of excellence for the Center of Excellence in Apprenticeship. So with that, I'll turn it over to Peter and Jenny. And you are muted, Peter.
Thanks so much, Sharon.
Thank you. Thank you. You know, we were originally thinking of just talking, but it's hard for us to talk without a PowerPoint. So we'll use this as much as we need it. It may be too much, and maybe it'll be for the next webinar as well. Thank you for inviting us to talk to you briefly. We were asked to talk about the role of adult education and CTE work with pre-apprenticeship and registered apprenticeships. If you can, put your name in the chat, but it's such a short webinar, we don't need to worry so much. Again, I'm Peter Simon. Very quickly, High Road Alliance is our partnership. We focus on equitable access to apprenticeship and career pathways for those who've been historically excluded. We work a lot with adult ed system, community college, unions, workforce boards, a number of people both doing research and direct technical assistance, as well as grant writing. Next slide.
So thanks for that opening, Peter. We're delighted to be here, and we've put on the screen here a few objectives for this quick little 30 minutes. We'll see if we can cover all of this, but we definitely wanted to begin by just exploring the really important role that we believe adult education can play, adult education, including career technical education, in really using pre-apprenticeship and apprenticeship to prepare adults for really good quality careers. We have some models we'd like to share with you of how this is working. We also have a resource that High Road Alliance has developed that can help teams to really think about equity in apprenticeship, which is where adult education can play a really, really important role. So we want to share that tool with you. It's something that we can go into more detail on in a future webinar. And we want to leave a little time at the end for questions and hearing some reactions from you. We hope that there will be some time for that.
So again, we're not quite sure exactly who we're talking to. This may be completely old hat to you, but when we talk about apprenticeship, we're talking about a full-time job on an earn and learn model that really is a career. And apprenticeships are generally a structured and regulated pathway that combines both classroom instruction and on-the-job training. When we talk about apprenticeship, we're talking about a formalized apprenticeship with labor, industry, education, and some form of governmental agency. And the basic definition of an apprenticeship is at least 144 hours of instruction linked with a minimum, it's sometimes much more, 2,000 hours of on-the-job training.
Now, again, this may be very basic for this crowd, going over the basics of pre-apprenticeship, but we really want to highlight this here because pre-apprenticeship is often the opportunity for adult education to come into the conversation about apprenticeship. A pre-apprenticeship program needs to link to and really facilitate that entrance into an apprenticeship program. So it can be a bridge in for students who are still working on basic language and math skills. It can be an opportunity to provide participants with an introduction to the technical skills. And it can also be a way to do some career exploration and sort of present what a range of occupations could be, maybe even a range of apprenticeship programs. It can mirror apprenticeship in that it can involve both classroom and hands-on training, and it can include that work readiness or soft skills area. Many of these possible topics and areas of instruction in pre-apprenticeship are really addressed very well by those with expertise in adult education. We wanted to mention here that in some areas, like in California, where Peter and I have done most of our work, there is a process for registering pre-apprenticeships. The California Division of Apprenticeship Standards has a formal process for doing this. But in many ways, in many areas, in many settings, a pre-apprenticeship isn't officially registered.
So since we're focused on adult education and apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship, you know, in terms of the research we've done, and we'll talk about that more in a second, you know, adult schools sometimes offer a pre-apprenticeship or apprenticeship on their own, but oftentimes they do it in partnership with unions, this long list, employers, community colleges, and notably community-based organizations. And if we get to it, we can talk about one example of that. Oftentimes ESL and adult basic ed are integrated into pre-apprenticeship and less, but sometimes with apprenticeship as well, through an integrated education and training, which is linked co-teaching or as a supplemental support for people who need those kind of basic skills supports. CTE often is the related and supplemental instruction, which they call it in California. And that's usually the training component of an apprenticeship and often based at a community college. Next slide. One example, which we worked with here in the Northern California, was in the construction sector, which was a partnership between a local building trades council, 2 community colleges, 2 workforce boards, the Employment Development Department, the UI, and they offered the MC3 National Construction Pre-Apprenticeship Program. They've been extremely successful. They've offered at least probably more like 16 cohorts now of adult education students who are moving into with a high level of success into union apprenticeship programs. I'll just say we've heard now about a number of them graduating and are now journey level workers making really outstanding wages. Next example.
There's another example here in the hospitality industry, which is what we call a non-traditional apprenticeship. There's not a long history of apprenticeships in tourism and hospitality, but here's an example that Peter and I have worked with. It's a labor management partnership. So it's a union working closely with employers who have developed this registered apprenticeship program. This one's registered both at the federal and at the state level. And they have a deep partnership that's been in place with their local adult education provider. They're really trying to approach community members who need the basic skills instruction to get into these roles, but with a very short, concise presentation of the technical skills integrated with the basic skills education. These participants are hired into these career lattice jobs after an 8-week or a 5-week program that leads them directly into an employment. So it's a nice partnership example with a labor union, employers, and an adult ed provider. Peter and I wanted to share with you that we come at this work having done quite a bit of research that's really helped us think about it and informed it. We did quite a bit of research on English learners' access to apprenticeships across the country, interviewing programs, trying to understand the extent to which programs are really working hard to bridge English learners into apprenticeship. We also went a little deeper in California with a survey and a series of what we called peer learning circles to hear from apprenticeship practitioners and pre-apprenticeship practitioners about how they were making sure that access to their programs was equitable. And this really helped us to understand the role of adult education. So we heard in this research that it really is important for these programs to very intentionally apply what we call an equity lens and really be looking carefully at whether the full range and diversity of members of the community are accessing these programs and these employment opportunities. And one thing we heard from those we talked to is just that partnerships are really key. And this includes partnerships with adult education. It includes partnerships with community organizations, like Peter said. And through these partnerships, the apprenticeships and pre-apprenticeships are really integrating the range of skills building that needs to happen, including basic skills, including job readiness skills. They're building in the community resources that support people's success. They're involving workers' voices in designing the program, and they're designing really individualized support. But at the same time, we found the field really needs examples of how this can work. Some of these programs are very creative. They're really thinking outside the box about how to do this. But it's difficult sometimes in building a program to hear these examples, which can be so inspiring.
So in terms of looking specifically at the role of adult education in addressing equity and apprenticeship, you know, one thing that is clear, absolutely clear, is adult education needs to be at the table for the initial design and development of these programs, and not as someone you contact after you've already designed a program. You know, I think, as you know, and the people on this call know, that apprenticeship are not historically diverse. And, you know, given who adult education systems serve, it's bringing access to that whole population to the whole discussion about building apprenticeship. And, you know, we've talked to people in many different states, and there's really great examples, but they really have not been scaled to a large degree across the United States. Next slide.
So we wanted to just kind of frame this 30 minutes with you today around this opportunity. And we're going to share a little bit more kind of practical tools to take advantage of this opportunity. But a main point we wanted to make is just that there's a real opportunity at this point in time, at this point in our nation's investment in apprenticeship as a training model, in bringing adult education into these partnerships. If you look at the recent releases from the Department of Labor, probably from your state apprenticeship programs of funding opportunities, there's a real emphasis on serving historically underserved populations. There's a real interest in how we as a country can embrace this model of training and make sure that we're making it available to the full range of workers who could benefit from it. An interesting thing that we note and try to emphasize is that if this opportunity is presented to us, adult education providers already serve many of these populations and can play really critical roles in making our programs accessible to them. So when you think about the range of community members who are served by your programs who may have limited basic skills, creating the pathways into programs that will be accessible to them could really draw on the strengths of adult education. And fortunately, a lot of this funding that's coming out with the intention of serving more diverse community members can cover the costs of collaboration in design, which should be including adult ed. So it's a chance to kind of bring everyone to the table and have the conversations about how our respective strengths can come into play.
So Jenny and I spent a good part of a year in partnership with the Foundation for California Community Colleges and many practitioners in the field, actually, in designing this, what we call the Equitable Apprenticeship Toolkit. We can also put this link in the chat. And it was really meant to be, to kind of take the whole, a lot of people talk about equity, but we really wanted to get something that was nuts and bolts, really useful to break down, thinking about each step along the way, what you need to do to ensure equity in pre-apprenticeship and apprenticeship. So if you can go to the next slide, a core sort of key to the toolkit is this framework. And those of you who are at the COABE conference may have seen this before, but I'll just say, typically when people talk about equity, they talk about access and recruitment. And some people define equity as, well, we'll open the door and that way people can come in. But one thing we have learned in our research and working with a lot of programs is that really it's all phases of apprenticeship. You really have to, as Jenny said, have an equity lens on the process and really think about what you need to do to ensure success of people who've been historically included. So program and service design, absolutely. Yes, access and recruitment. Again, for many adult ed programs, it's pre-apprenticeship. And then importantly, in terms of what the data says, is that the transition from a pre-apprenticeship to an apprenticeship program is where historically a large number of women and people of color drop out or don't make it, or there could be a long time lag between the pre-apprenticeship and actually getting into an apprenticeship. So that's where a great deal of people are lost in the process. So we really help people try and think about what needs to be done to support people, and then how to support people in apprenticeship. Because again, looking at the data, yes, you can get more women and people of color into apprenticeship programs, but they also currently drop out of these programs at a much higher rate than white males. Next slide.
And Peter, I'm hoping maybe you can put that link into the chat since I'm sharing my
Okay.
screen. It's a little harder for me to
Okay.
navigate around, but we
Okay,
would love
please.
people
I'll
to,
do that right now.
we'd love for people to click on this link and start exploring this tool. It's something that may help you in your programs and the processes you're going through. Like we said, the toolkit is meant to kind of go step by step and help you apply an equity lens to program planning. It's meant for use by a whole team of partners. And so here's where we've encouraged its use with teams that include adult education as an example, but could also include community-based organizations, should include labor, employers, workforce boards, a whole range of partners who can contribute. There's a set of tools related to information gathering, kind of looking at the data that should inform your action planning. And there's another set of tools related to that action planning. Each of the tools includes a table that you can start filling out and using to kind of create plans. And this is available in a workbook that's a kind of Word version of a lot of these tables and things that you can use. So it's something for you to kind of look through and pick and choose resources from. You don't have to move straight through. I'm going to show you a next slide here that shows a list of the 14 tools in the toolkit. Some of these may be more appropriate than others. If you're looking at bringing an adult education partnership into your apprenticeship or pre-apprenticeship program, for example, you might want to be looking at some of the information gathering tools to understand who in your community is served by adult education or who has limited basic skills. Are there apprenticeship entry requirements that make it difficult for someone who is an English learner, for example, or who doesn't have a high school diploma? Are there things we know about the conditions that suggest certain changes we might need to make? The action planning tools then can help you think about how, through partnerships, like partnerships with adult education, you can make the program more accessible. And we have tools specifically about designing a pre-apprenticeship, for example, or looking deeply at your apprenticeship classroom training, or even your on-the-job training and how to make that accessible. In each of these cases, having an adult education provider as a participant can help you look at the full range of opportunities that, again, might support an English language learner, someone who needs to work on their math that will be applied in this occupation, or someone who's still working toward a high school diploma.
And again, given the sort of time constraints, we just wanted to quickly show you an example of a pre-apprenticeship that I worked with very closely, and we used the toolkit in developing an equity-focused pre-apprenticeship program, in this case for a bus operator pre-apprenticeship program with a joint labor management and a community college and an adult school. Next slide. So very briefly, this is going to be sort of a run through, but it really was this amazing teamwork. And again, they really used the toolkit, both in terms of gathering data, important data, actually working on a grant that funded this project, that we used the pre-apprenticeship toolkit and really identified barriers. And then the group together worked on how to actually address each barrier very effectively. And this is really important area because I think, as you know, public transit in itself is an equity strategy in terms of getting low income and essential workers to work in church and school, et cetera. Next slide. So in terms of the access and recruitment, because it was identified using a tool that 60% of people applying for the bus operator job at this transit agency did not make it past the entrance exam. The employer agreed that we design the pre-apprenticeship program so effectively that they are going to waive that exam entirely for people completing the program. We're utilizing bilingual outreach specialists. Everything is done in English and Spanish. We're working with local adult schools regionally to recruit people. And again, because there's a great need for bus operators, the company is actually offering a stipend for people who are entering and completing the program. Next slide, please. The pre-apprenticeship is again being developed with this Golden Gate Transit, the bus company, and we're using peer mentors who are bus operators, union members, who will be working very closely with the adult ed teachers to make sure that the pre-apprenticeship is really addressing what's needed on the job. And we're going to have a practicum class where the pre-apprenticeship students will not only get to ride along on a bus, but actually complete the application and actually do an interview for the job while they're in the pre-apprenticeship program. All the things that were barriers basically got eliminated. And the next slide, please. And finally, in terms of the transition, one thing, because we're working again as a team, one area again where people disappear between a pre-apprenticeship and apprenticeship program is there's a big time lag. So we aligned the completion of the pre-apprenticeship so that there's only a 2-week break between completing the pre-apprenticeship and going to work as a bus operator. So there will be no gap. And again, there'll be an additional bonus for people signing on, and the peer mentor and the outreach specialist will be providing the important sort of social support to make sure that people don't fall through the cracks. That was a very quick run through of what's usually an hour presentation, but we'd like to just leave a few minutes for
It's-
you all to ask a couple questions. We can talk
And-
about this more in a later webinar.
And we already have a question in the chat, Peter. Thanks, Dorma, for your question. It's what are some of the reasons for the dropouts in apprenticeships for the groups you mentioned? And it's a really good question. And I think part of the reason that we make this presentation with a focus on including adult education is that there are sometimes academic reasons why students don't complete the classroom training portion of an apprenticeship. And we've definitely heard this, that there sometimes is need for support for people to be able to complete college level classes. And that support can be provided either through more preparation in a pre-apprenticeship or by integrating support during the apprenticeship training. And that's again where involving an adult education partner and thinking about how to integrate the math skills that are needed for success, how to introduce some of the basic technical concepts, how to support someone who's still working on their English language skills, providing that so that someone doesn't struggle so much with the academics that they have to leave. I think it's also important to mention that we hear a lot about retention issues related to just life getting in the way, whether it's transportation or childcare. And these are issues that adult education providers are very familiar with, and often partnerships either with an educational institution's counseling or support services or with a community-based organization can help to address those. Peter, what would you add in response to that
I would
question?
add also, in addition to what Jenny just mentioned, that, and both from what we've heard and also my direct experience having been in the construction trades, it's one thing to get people in, particularly women and people of color, into some of these trades where they've been historically excluded. But then it's often not easy to be the only woman or the only Black person on a job. And that's where it's really important that you have programs like the peer mentor program where you pay attention to sort of what's going on. You don't just throw people out on the job and then say, good luck, let us know how it goes. That you really need to have a sort of ongoing, thoughtful support of people who you've put into these jobs who may need additional levels of social support or peer support or support from their union and their employers as well.
Mhm.
Hopefully that addressed some.
So there's the chat has a thank you from Dorma. You're welcome. I think we have time. This has been a really packed half an hour, but we might have time for another question. If anyone would like to enter something in the chat box, I don't know if you're able to come off mute. We probably have time for about one more. And we'd be very happy to continue the conversation with any of you. I think we're going to move to I'll move to the next slide now just to make sure you have our contact information. We'd be happy to follow up with any of you if you have more specific questions or would like to share what you're doing in your programs and how this could be relevant. We are always excited to learn from others how the work we're trying to do could relate to the work you're doing.
Yep.
So we encourage you to be in touch. We also provide our website there. We have a page of resources. Some of those include an article that I wrote in the spring 2020 edition of the COABE journal on opening doors to apprenticeship for English language learners, which is something of specific interest of mine. There are a number of other articles in that edition of the COABE journal that are related to apprenticeship. And you can find a link. Actually, I think I had another link to that journal. I wonder if I stop my share, I might be able to put that link in the chat here.
I could maybe, if you don't want to lose that.
I think I can find that. But if anyone else has a question, we're happy to answer another question.
Please. And if not, we have 1 minute left. Thank you for listening to us kind of zoom through this, but we wanted to give you an idea of kind of our work and what we're paying attention to.
Mm-hmm.
And as Jenny said, we love hearing from people around the country Again, our work has sort of began in California, but more and more we're working on a national level on this topic because the interest is so great, as I can see all of you on this webinar. So we're please feel free to get in touch.
And
Thank you, Peter.
I did just put the link there in the chat to the COABE journal that you might be interested in looking at.
And thank you, Jenny. We really appreciate this. I knew when I tapped you both, you do a great job. So if you all could just give a thanks to them for their excellent work. And I know they will be joining us, I believe, in next month too, to do a deeper dive on this. So thank you, Jenny and Peter. And
Thank
if
you.
anyone from NAWDP is still on the line, I will turn it back over to them. I see Melissa and Teresa are there, but let's see if they respond. If not, we'll head on out. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. We'll see you next month. Thank you,
Have
Peter
a
and Jenny.
good rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye now.